Cool. All right. So, welcome everyone.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. So actually, Rupert on the last call, he mentioned that he really want to talk about awareness, and it's funny because he's not on the call today. But I think it's a good topic to start off because it's kind of like why we're all here, I think, in a way. And yeah. So we all have obviously a different background and kind of our conditioning that shapes our awareness. I think that's probably a good place to start. And there's different words for like what people think of when they think of awareness. So we can go into that as well and some different sort of ways to think about it. But from my perspective, I think probably my background's maybe a little bit different from a lot of people, and that's why I maybe think about the world differently. So it's good maybe just to share a bit about that, and then obviously we can get some input from you guys as well on how you think about this stuff. I think the one of the biggest maybe differences is that I didn't go to school until I was 11, and so I was actually raised in this sort of like a community, like a kibbutz, where there's multiple families raising their kids together and playing together. And so I was homeschooled basically by different adults and different fields, and they were not like experts or teachers or anything. They just that's what they did because we didn't go to school. Um, and so I think that really changed my whole experience because I grew up very insulated from the world in a way, which is a good and bad thing. I think that community had its own sort of style of indoctrination and conditioning, which I also broke away from. But I didn't get the whole immersion into culture, like mainstream culture, until I was about 11. And so that really changed when I got into school at 11 and started going through normal life. It really changed how I viewed it because it wasn't normal for me. It was a complete shock, like culture shock for me. And I actually have five brothers and sisters, so we all kind of went through this together. The eldest three, I'm the second eldest, but the eldest three were more raised outside of that system, and the youngest three actually went to school from a young age, so they didn't see the contrast as strongly. But I think that awareness is huge because you see the world completely differently. You don't fit in, you don't belong from the beginning, and then spend a lot of years trying to kind of come to terms with that, how to integrate back into normal life, how to belong, try and find friends and find things in common and things. And so that really wasn't easy because I had no common reference, like all the TV shows people used to watch or all the football teams or whatever it was that people were into in that age. I had really none of that. And so it was like kind of rebuilding an identity almost and trying to fit in. And I think that we all kind of do that in a way, is like we all have a need to belong, and we're all trying to build an identity that kind of relates and fits in. And if you don't really have a strong awareness of who you are, you'll just try and blend in with society around you. And I think that's what's happening a lot for a lot of kids and people today, is that we lose that sense of who we are because we're just kind of merging into this culture, and all these values come from places we don't really understand. So that was for me was yeah, really interesting to go through school. Didn't enjoy it all. Found it quite boring, and also it also taught me that education was boring. And so I think that's another big thing, that people come out of school thinking, oh, I never want to read a book again, or I never want to learn again. And so that really killed the fun for me. But I actually, because I didn't really fit in at school, what I did was I go to the library a lot. And so I would end up just reading alone by myself all the time. And didn't have a lot of friends until I was maybe 15, 16, later on in life. So for many years in school, I would just go to this, school library lunch and just read, and then I would read at home, and I would just be reading all the time. And I think that definitely sparked my love for reading, and that obviously led to a love for learning later on in life. But initially, the idea of education was just super boring because, you sit down for an hour and you get moved to another class and moved to another class, and then nothing is connected, and it's just, yeah, you're just remembering facts and numbers for tests. And like I was great at it all, like I got top grades in my class, and uh, didn't even revise or whatever. I just found the whole exercise very pointless, and so it kind of killed that love for learning. So I think this is, again, like, definitely stuff we'll go into further, but in terms of awareness, like, all those things shape you, right, and how you see the world. And then the other interesting thing was when I went to school, I'd actually stopped traveling because as a kid, a lot of the time we were just moving around a lot in different homes, different places, and so I was so used to change all the time. And I think that your experiences where you're actually physically living, and the countries you're in, and the environments really shapes us. And so when I went to school, I actually stopped traveling. My family settled down for a good 10 years, and so I was around other people that had been born, raised, lived in a single village their whole lives, and these are my friends. So that was super interesting to see, like, the contrast, that I'd never stayed in one place more than a few years, and then seeing people like that who just been in the same place their whole lives, And then I stayed friends with some of these people through university and you know, going into work and stuff later. And they went back to their homes, some of them, like that was just normal because that's where they were comfortable. And for me, I was just so comfortable with change that I just moved again, you know, to cities, to London, then to Singapore, then just kept moving and moving. And so for me, change has been a constant in my life. And I think that when you have a change in your environment, it really shifts your awareness because you see how other people are living, you see how other things are done. And without that, you really have quite maybe a you know, insular view of the world. So I think a lot of people have that maybe that sort of blind spot too from just their environment. And now we're obviously connected through the internet, and you can watch lots of movies, and you can kind of travel without traveling. So there's a lot of exposure happening to kind of connect ideas and imagination, even if you're just stuck in a village somewhere. And I think that it doesn't have to be the case, but obviously in our time, you know, growing up before the internet was super connected, I think that was definitely for our generation a big factor. And if you're raised in a city, you're going to get exposed to a lot more things. And if you're raised in a village, you know, your worldview might be a little bit limited. So yeah, so I love to travel and still do that today. I mean, I've lived in almost 30 countries, and I think that that's given me a really strong contrast just for not getting too attached to like an identity of who I am. Because, you know, if you're raised in Britain, I'm British, I'm English, and you see that, you know, that pub culture, people just go to the pub and spend their whole lives in a pub and with a very small circle of friends. So your view of the world is going to be super different from someone who travels all the time and goes to different countries. And I think that sometimes our identity also kind of sticks us down a little bit and limits how we can see the world, and maybe break out of certain blind spots, or, you know, just expand our awareness and our perception of things. So that's kind of my overview for where I think awareness comes from, and maybe like an upbringing perspective, and obviously the things we're exposed to. I think that yeah, for me, I wouldn't change anything. Like the way it happened, you know, I had moments in time where I wasn't happy and I didn't fit in, I didn't belong. And those things are all strengths now because I can enjoy many different styles of living and have lots of different friends. And there's a huge richness and diversity, like just all the guys, or you guys that I know from travel and you know, going on the road and having different conversations. So life is super interesting now, and I enjoy that kind of richness and different perspectives. And I don't get too attached to like, well, this is me, this is who I am, because I realize I'm just always changing. And I think that change is probably speeding up for a lot of people because, like I said, the world is connected so much more than it was. And for some people, that can be quite overwhelming, and they want to try and hold on to an identity and a meaning. And so I think that meaning is kind of always being redefined now because the world is just changing so much. So that's kind of my sort of overview for awareness and how it shapes us, and how maybe maybe you guys can also share something that comes to you if you think there's something that that you can add to that, like what awareness means for you. Why do you think that it's important in today's context? But that for me, I think is the really strong part. And then I've gone through all kinds of other different experiences. Like I think when I went to India about 10 years ago, and I was at that time working 9 to 5, and I was not so happy in London. And so I left that condition, that environment, with a bunch of people around me that were not happy, and, you know, old and aging and sick and things like that. And basically having experience going to India, completely different culture, different people. I obviously went to quite a bubble as well in India because I went to an Ayurvedic retreat. So this is something where you are on a special diet, doing like a detox. So doing yoga every day, massage every day, different food every day from what I was normally eating. So again, those kind of contrasts in direct experience, it really changes you, because when you come back from somewhere like that, you're never the same person. You've experienced a different way of feeling, and you know that other experiences are possible. So you can't just settle for what you were before you left. And I had some really powerful experiences with energy healers and things there as well. So that sort of physical and visceral awareness versus like an abstract knowledge of you know, knowing you should do something but not actually maybe doing it, like exercising. A lot of people talk about, yeah, they know they should work out, they know they should eat well, but what is the difference between like knowing something in an abstract sense and then actually knowing it and experiencing it and feeling it? And so it's real for you, and then you can do something because you just know it works, and you don't need willpower, and you don't need to be convinced or something with studies or whatever. So I think that that's a big disconnect as well for a lot of people today, is that we maybe have access to a lot of information, and that can bring awareness, but without some way of integrating it or seeing an example of it in your life, like a direct experience, someone around you doing it, showing it to you. I think that's also a big disconnect. People can't take that knowledge, and it kind of gets stuck in your head. And I think we think a lot from our head, right? So that's quite a normal way of like conditioning. So that's something I think is worth thinking about. And then the other aspect of awareness is, again, what you're perceiving the world with, right? Because your awareness is shaped by what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're touching, what you're feeling. And so we have inner and outer senses. And I think the outer senses are probably the most heightened because we're not really trained to go inward. And I think that there's a lot of traditions that talk about that. And some of you guys are really into that, which is going to be fun to talk about this. But the idea that, you know, we have all these senses and some are more sharpened than others, and probably our inner senses are quite dull in that sense. So like things like intuition, I would call a sense. And we have sort of, you know, an instinctive response maybe to danger, which is something that's not, it's not triggered all the time today because we're not surrounded by lions and tigers, but there's that thing that is in us still. It's like a very primal sense. And I think that tapping into that can also be very interesting for our awareness, for understanding who we are. So definitely the senses I want to get into as well. And we're going to obviously talk about this on more shows. But for me, the only thing I can add is that I think from a senses, I actually have no sense of smell, which is interesting. And so that, I think, actually has led to other senses maybe being heightened. And I've never really met many other people with that. It's something from having birth, so I never really missed it. I never knew what it was like to have it or lose it, and so I don't really consider it a loss. But that's something else that has always made me different and not fit in and kind of be weird or whatever. And something I had to just accept about myself. And it's very easy to hide because no one knows you can't smell. If they meet you, you have a nose, you look like anyone else. So it's just something that's kind of funny. I joke about it a lot when I tell people because they can never remember, right? Because the next time they see me, they just assume that I can smell. And for a long time, even my family would push flowers on my nose and stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's been 10 years, you know, I can't smell. So it's like, it's just something that always reminds you you're different. And I think that's worked in my favor for the long term, I think. But that's also linked to a very primal sense. I think the sense is one of the oldest that's not well understood, and it's linked to memory and danger. Again, like if you sense, if you smell danger in you know, in your environment, in the jungle or in nature, it actually can save your life. And so these things aren't as necessary today as they used to be. But there's other aspects because it's again linked to memory, and so how it shapes your memories and things. If you don't have smell as like an anchor, then you have to rely on other senses. So yeah, for me that's super interesting. I've never smelled, so I can't compare the difference. I don't know if I ever will. So that's just something that, yeah, I wanted to add as a personal story. But yeah, I think there's limits kind of placed on our perception, what we're allowed to experience. Obviously, you know, with drugs, the labeling around certain drugs is all being bad or whatever, and drugs is like a huge spectrum of experience. So I think there are ways to expand your perception. These outer and inner senses can get heightened through different practices. And maybe the most powerful awareness for me recently was, again, a couple of years ago. I was actually, my business wasn't doing well, so I had actually stopped working. And this is the first time probably as an adult that I'd never had a job or been busy pursuing and actively chasing, you know, money. So my wife was supporting us, and I actually had the time to just do what I wanted to do. And I already had a pretty good practice at that time of like going outside and doing yoga. And so I would just go outside and then spend more time outside because I didn't need to come indoors and get back on my laptop. And that practice just got deeper and deeper, and I would spend more and more time outside. I started looking up at the sun and sun gazing, and that completely changed my life. And when I was outside, you know, spending hours feeling great, I would come back inside, and that contrast, again, that contrast of awareness is so strong. If you're always inside, that's just normal, right? You don't see any difference. And if you actually go outside and spend a good amount of time outside and get immersed in its natural light, and I talk about this a lot, then I think that's much more noticeable when you come back inside, or you go to a winter country. Like I grew up in UK, right? So I grew up with no sun. And then I was in Asia at the time when I was sun gazing. So that contrast of how you feel and how you feel coming back into the dark condition, and it's so low light conditions inside, you just realize that's not how our bodies actually evolved to live. There's, you know, a whole physiology that works around natural light. So I've done a lot of research into that, trying to understand the experience, but I actually had the experience first, just from having free time. And I think that our time is so limited in society because of how we're raised and conditioned to just chase a lot of things. And then also there's a lot of debt traps and things that hook us into being constantly on the wheel. And I think when you have free time to really explore, that can just open up your awareness massively. So I think that's a huge hack, if you like, to to build into your life is to try and find ways to free up your time and not even feel like you're so rushed, and you have time to explore things that don't have a direct monetary value or return, because these are just, that's how we're kind of wired and conditioned from very young to value the world. So yeah, so I think that that's a huge influence we can talk about as well. And the last point I had to raise was this idea of like attention, and how attention, where you put your attention is where your, obviously your awareness comes from, right? So you have your senses, and you use your senses to pay attention to things. And so I think that the modern world, again, with the pace of change in technology, there's so many things pulling on our attention, so much like information, so much opportunity, so much excitement. For me, I can travel anywhere, I can do all the other things. So there's just constant stimulus, which is great for people that love that. And I think there's a lot to be gained from that sort of richness of opportunity, but it can also be scattering for your attention. So in terms of I've got 50 tabs open on my browser at any one time, and I think that if you don't know how to focus your attention, then I think if it's constantly being pulled around, it's kind of like your attention is a superpower, because it's how you observe, and then obviously your ideas and your imagination is constantly triggering and running based on what you're perceiving. So what you're reading, if you're sun gazing, whatever your attention is focused on, it can be really powerful. And so I think that learning how to focus it, and there's different exercises again for that. You guys, some of you guys do some martial arts and different techniques like cold therapy. I think having a way to focus your attention, especially inwards, can be very empowering, and just noticing how you feel and what things change your state of being. I think those are things we're not really paying attention to, because our attention is just so scattered. And there's consequences to that in terms of health and just mental ease or dis-ease. I think if you're not able to control your attention, maybe your ego is constantly running around just playing games with you, then I think it can be quite frustrating. And I think people, try and find different ways to control that, or just not even aware of it. And so I think that's again a way that our superpower is kind of dulled, if you like, if your attention is scattered. And for me, sun gazing has been super powerful, because it's probably the most direct influence for me in my environment, that I can go and focus my attention without having to try and meditate or quiet my mind or something like that, which I find quite difficult actually. I used to, and now it's effortless in terms of looking at the sun, but traditional meditations never worked for me. And so that's something that I was aware was a problem, and I just didn't know how to solve it, because I couldn't find a solution. So yeah, so that's a little bit about my story and why I think this topic is so interesting. But if you guys have any questions, I'm just going to see if there's anything in the chat.
Well, I could raise one point that came up for me recently listening to one episode of this series that this professor, I think of psychology, John Vervaeke, has been putting out, very interesting, called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And in the series, he talks about how in modernity now we're experiencing the meaning crisis, meaning lots of people feel out of place. They feel they don't have meaning in their life. They don't connect to the surroundings or the stories that are being told in culture very much. And we also have a spike in suicides and all kinds of negative phenomena. And one of the points he made in this last episode was where he went into mindfulness and how that is sort of a response that's currently reverberating throughout the world to this meaning crisis. And one of the points he made is that he said that normally we don't pay attention to our sensations, we pay attention through our sensations, meaning that we don't actually pay attention to what we are feeling, we're just paying attention to what is going on out in the world, not with us, through how we're sensing into the world. And so one of the benefits and joys of meditation, if you can make it work for yourself, is to actually switch the point of focus from what am I feeling out in the world to what is that feeling actually itself, and then alternating between sort of reaching outwards and going inwards. And I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, so that's like being pulled, if you like. If your attention is being pulled constantly around you, then you're not in control of it. You're just reacting to what's in your environment. And I think that's how we're all living, right? We're reacting just constantly. Like if you're going to work and you're looking at the time and there's like a meeting and there's a deadline and there's someone, just constantly pulling. If you have kids or family, probably there's other things pulling your attention. So So what can you do then? Like, what's a practical thing to stop that pattern? Or like, is it, for me, like I find a morning ritual a really powerful thing because it kind of sets my whole day up. And I think that, yeah, that for me is something we can talk about. But Emil, go on, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely had some experiences with how attention gets scattered through use like Facebook, where you scroll down a wall and you get so much information in such a short time, and a little tiny piece of your attention goes to that information, even though you don't recognize it consciously. It's like you watch something somewhere, someone is in Africa doing a tour in the jungle, that a tiny bit of your concentration and effort goes into that little post. Even though you scroll down to the next one, you still have a little tiny piece of your brain attached to that piece. And the more you use services like that, the more information you take in, the more your concentration and your awareness scatters into all these things. And I've found with deep meditation retreats that when you have full focus on your senses or just on your breath or on your body, it's completely different. It feels like you actually don't need anything. So if we go back to the purpose of life, it feels like when our attention is fully there, it's enough just to observe the senses and be with that, because that can be so amazing just as it is, because everything is felt through the senses. So even just watching a butterfly fly from a flower to another flower, it can feel like life living through you, just watching that through the senses of your eyes. And but it doesn't happen if your full attention is not there. So if your attention is on the work or on your schedule or something like that, you still see the butterfly, but you don't focus enough energy to that exact thing that it invigorates these feelings in you. They'll still be there on a slight level, but if you manage to focus your full mind power or whatever it is, your full awareness and attention into something, it's enough just to be there with that. Even though what it is, you can watch the waves, you can watch the snow falling from the trees, something like that. But without the full awareness, it feels meaningless. And I think that's why a lot of people feel that there's not much meaning in life, because they have too much things to do. They have too many thoughts, too many tasks, too much stuff to think about. So everything is just scattered around and there's no focus in anything. But if you manage to bring that focus back, even just sitting, watching out at something through the window can be like beautiful experiences through the senses. Like you can feel almost like, maybe it's too early to go into that, but almost like orgasmic feelings just by being very focused and observing and watching. Because if you really understand what's going on in the body with the senses, then it's there, it's full on, it's a beautiful experience, but it takes a lot of power to go there. And with the way we are all living now in the Western world, it's really, really hard to go there. I normally lose the whole focus attention bit coming out of 10-15 days retreats where the focus and attention is so strict on whatever I point to is almost too much. But after 3 or 4 days back in the real world, it's gone again. I'm totally back. The mind is everywhere. And even without using computers and phones, I can't keep it in that state. So definitely takes a lot of isolation and focus to be able to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful, like, we don't know how powerful it can be when our attention is focused, because we're so used to just normal society that pulls it all around. So I think unless you have that contrast to know how it can be, you just don't even realize how powerful we are. And I think, like I said, it's a superpower in that sense, because when you're really focused, you get this amazing, insights, empathy. Like, we have mirror neurons that are designed to trigger when we observe, other animals and other people. So there's all kinds of like pathways that are evolved when we're present. And before time was invented and society was invented and all these modern constructs, I think it was a lot easier to be present. And obviously nature is, just being in nature will make you more present, because you see it around you, and it's a very nice feeling and you feel relaxed. And so I think think about stress, we can talk about that as well, probably another topic in more detail. But stress is something that will just constantly pull you out of your current state of presence. And it's usually because we're living from the past and projecting forward into the future and imagining some outcome that's unpleasant. And there's a lot of different modern stresses on us as well that just take our energy and attention away. So I think that being aware of those things and learning how to reduce them, and also finding ways to build up your resilience from stress, is something that can really help your awareness. But I'll go into that in more detail on another podcast for sure. But over to you, Lynn, because you had your hand up.
Yeah, the interesting thing I've noticed personally is that it's kind of bouncing off what yourself, Moritz, and Emil have been saying. Methods of attaining this calm, this mindfulness, meditation. Meditation can occur, I think, in many ways. It can be from being stationary to requiring physical exertion. When they say, get a hobby sort of thing, whether it's a team activity or something, that meaning of focus, having to obtain focus, seems to be able to bring about via physical activity a state of mental calm. From my experience personally, from those I've spoken to, also, even if it's something, say, with stationary meditation, the act of actually being stationary, if your legs are crossed, requires physical effort, exertion, and it seems that it's a kind of a nice shortcut way of getting. Obviously, requires practice, time, and effort to get there, and repetition. But I do find that an easy way to get this to, what you're doing in physical sports, some people go for a run, they go for a walk, to clear their minds. These things are always, or whether it's to shock the body, always to be able to get your mind to focus, on your senses, not, again, like Moritz saying, not just looking at it all through your senses, helps you to focus, because, you things like you hearing yourself breathing, just the act of hearing yourself breathing, panting, stuff like it. So, and that's without even directing instruction, just saying to someone, go run, it could do that, So if you want a quick way to do it, it could be a way to do it, experience some physical activity. I've never personally experienced it without doing anything physical. But that could be a way, even if, to stand on a spot on one leg and to stare at the point on the wall, that might be of use. I thought I'd just put that out there.
Yeah, I think that being connected to your body makes you a lot more present for sure. I think it's like a pattern interrupt, so that we can talk again about cold exposure maybe on another podcast in more detail. But that's very visceral, because it's almost like what I was saying before, how your survival senses wouldn't normally get triggered in today's world, but something like falling into an ice lake where you're going to die in 10, 20 minutes if you don't get out, that is very quickly going to pull you out of your mind, and you're going to be focused on your immediate, environment. So people use that therapeutically now, because it's the only way to shut your mind up and get that direct, sensory experience that then gives you that sense of peace, of presence. But yeah, Moritz, go on.
I think one of the ways we can sort of understand why this is such a pervasive phenomenon that people have a hard time finding meaning and also paying attention to their senses is that we live in a very complex society. Like by now it's a global society pretty much, and that means that the effects of our actions reverberate not only to our immediate environment, but also to sort of our extended environment through communication networks, etc. And also the information that we pay attention to and that we need to pay attention to is also not only present in our immediate environment, but actually comes at us from many different places. And the actions of some people somewhere all halfway around the globe can impact us. And so we we actually have to pay attention to things that are not in our immediate environment. So it's not necessarily that this is just a bad thing and just a maladaptation, but it is actually a very real sort of side effect of us having exceeded the scale of cooperation that used to be 150 people or somewhere around that number, and today it's like millions and millions. And so in a society where our labor is not actually immediately showing an effect, but a lot of the knowledge work, for example, that we do actually is necessary for some other thing, for some other thing, for some other thing that then maybe has an effect on some real person. We never really get to see both action and effect together immediately, and so we don't get that feedback loop very, very simply. So we always have to sort of do intermediate things and have to, for ourselves, tell us a story why what we're doing is meaningful. So if you don't have that story, if you can't create it, you will have to fall into a story that somebody else is telling you. And so the ones that people end up going towards is, let's say, movies, sort of superhero stories, or the regular religion stories, all those kind of things. And then another point that's sort of connected to that is that there was this experimentation that Jaron Lanier did when he's one of the pioneers of virtual reality. He actually, like back in the 70s, I think he was doing virtual reality before this became something that entered the public consciousness. And one thing that he noticed was that you can actually very easily extend your sense of body into limbs or objects that aren't actually connected to your body. Like he had this sensational experience where when he entered into virtual reality and he has sort of a third limb, let's say it comes out of your chest. If you have a way to manipulate that limb and like make it move through whatever controls, very soon you'll start to feel and use it as naturally as you would all the limbs that you actually have on your body. And so the same kind of thing happens, I think, with our digital information networks and our sort of identity in digital space. We start to relate to it as an extended part of our body that other people can actually act on, and that we feel threats through and feel opportunities come at. And so we have this sort of constant underlying neurotic anxiety that something is happening to my avatar in digital space that I'm not aware of when I'm not online. And so people constantly feel this need to go back and check, oh, did somebody write a bad comment? Oh, did somebody like post something about that's bad? So that will probably disproportionately affect people who don't have a very grounded sense of who they are and that their life is going fundamentally in the right direction. And so that's also what is so dangerous to these large sort of social media enterprises. If people have that very grounded sense of where their life is going and they are able to fight off the constant drag of attention sucking from these algorithms that actually optimize for sucking your attention. And I think one of the responses that I'm seeing with, for example, you, Michael, with other people in this group, as well as some people online that I follow, how they deal with that, and I think it's sort of an emerging response in our age, is hyper meaningfulness, in the sense that people start to arrange their lives in such a way that they actually have sort of virtually every waking moment of their lives, they have super meaningful experiences by arranging all the parts of their life in a way that support each other, in order to overcome the sort of attention suck phenomenon, and to reset the level of significance that some stimulus needs to cross in order to enter their attention and to actually make them do something. So yeah, I think that's also what psychedelics do. Actually, I'm actually reading a paper right now that a friend of mine is writing on psychedelics with AI and life, and like a whole new paradigm of bringing all these things together. And one of the things he talks about is that that psychedelics, the one thing that all of them share, regardless of what their sort of chemical mechanism is they bring you closer to chaos. And through doing so, they actually have you enter into a state of self-criticality, meaning that's the point between structure and chaos, where it's perfect balance in a sense. And there is a structure, but it is perfectly able to self-organize in response to all kinds of new stimulus, but still remain meaningfully ordered. So it's this middle point. And that's also why people sort of have this sense of renewed meaning afterwards. I mean, some of them do. If they have a bad trip, probably not. It sort of dissolved some of the structures that keep them confined, like religious stories or whatever it is that sort of really keeps them fixated in this consensus trance of all the stories that are told to them from everyone around them, or that they tell themselves even. And then suddenly they're open again to new stimulus that can help them form new stories.
Yeah, we're definitely going into psychedelics again, probably another show, because there's a lot to talk about. But that's super interesting that there's different ways, like you said, to kind of build up your buffer against constantly being disturbed, if you like. And I think what you pay attention to, because we spend so much time online, like you're right, it's like an extension of our identity. And so we probably do pay a lot more attention there than to our immediate environment, especially if you're working online or you're connected to people online. Like I think that's just more and more normal, right? You're going to want to find people who are like you, and there's probably not that many people maybe in your direct town, village, or whatever. So you're going to seek out meaning in these kind of communities or just online forums and stuff. So that's for me, it's been a big part of my life, trying to understand myself better. And I think that you can end up paying too much attention, if you like, maybe relative to your immediate world, and it just kind of gets out of balance where your this avatar becomes who you are. And I think with VR probably going to get more immersive and more real. It's only going to become more of an issue of like what's balanced. I'm not like against technology in that sense. I think it can be super useful for finding meaning as well. But if you get wrapped up in your whole digital construct being your identity, then you're kind of not in control necessarily anymore, because Facebook and all these algorithms are just sucking your attention, and it's hard to even notice sometimes until you get away from it. Like, I can go 11 days without food and water, but I find it hard to go a couple of days without being connected, and it's just ridiculous, right? It's like, where is that coming from? It's a very interesting conditioning, and I get a lot of meaning out of being online, right? Because I'm sharing all the time and stuff. So I feel like there is meaning there, and I don't think I need to be off computers entirely, but I think the balance is probably off. And so again, that comes back to, like, for me, maybe the most powerful thing I do is my morning ritual. If the first thing I get up and do is be on my phone for hours and get stuck into the world, I'm just not as happy. And if I spend the first few hours, focusing on my immediate environment, getting out to nature, sun gazing, exercising in the grass, like, those things all set me up to feel amazing for the rest of the day. It's just what works really well for me. But yeah, it's super interesting. Ollie, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I was just wanting to say, because I was thinking about this idea of the feedback loop and everything else, I think for me, the idea of a feedback loop is something that I've been interested in for a long time. And it's essentially the idea that you perform an action and you immediately have a response. So in today's world, with your attention being spread out and being kind of sent out somewhere to someone in a kind of an alienation sort of way, it kind of does make you lose your connection. And so I feel you do experience life or experience the world through this avatar. And then when you have the other side of it, what you were saying before about experiencing things through your senses and through your body, the more tight the feedback loop is, the closer the relationship is between what you're doing and what you're experiencing. So you're creating the world as it's being created in your own perception anyway, or something like that. And, that's getting a bit more, I guess, psychedelic-y, but that's what it is, isn't it? You're like collapsing things down into chaos. You're experiencing things without a structure as they're happening. So I definitely think that the idea of a feedback loop and direct experience relates to the idea of symbolic knowledge and experiencing things through an avatar. So I just wanted to throw that there.
So you're saying when the feedback is more immediate between what you're putting out and what you're getting back, that changes, change your perception, or how's that like? How do you apply that?
I think that, well, for me, I do martial arts, right? So I do martial arts in a kind of it's a kind of an internal process. It's not really about the fighting, as far as my initial inspiration to do it is. So when you're experiencing things and you don't know what exactly is coming in towards you, you can only experience it through your senses ultimately. But then when you begin to, I think, experience things through a more internal way, you're getting some kind of ecstatic experience or some kind of emotional experience. There's no real way to understand, or how do you measure that against yourself? So when people step out of their usual perception of things, it's balanced against their previous experience, which is symbolic. So what I'm trying to say is that when you have a tighter feedback loop, you do something and then you experience a meaning for it on a much deeper level straight away, And so the more connected you are to your body, the more immediately you're going to feel what's happening. The more disconnected you are from who you are and what you really are, the more you step into things as an avatar. And so I think the whole thing of cold exposure or meditation or psychedelics or what have you is all about kind of breaking down those sort of societal vehicles that you think you're experiencing the world through. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, it's like it's like a pattern interrupt from your avatar life, from your other extensions of how you perceive reality.
Yeah, and so I always try to judge everything by something akin to like a feedback loop. Even if it's a job where you're doing some work and you don't really know. There's no immediate feedback. It's hard to tell. How can you optimize? The more entrepreneurial you are, the more of a feedback loop you have, the more agency you have over your life. It's kind of the same metaphor. Yeah. Sorry if that's a bit
no, it's interesting.
Unstructured.
I mean, I can add something here, I think, which is there's a lot of studies and research has gone into the experience of flow itself and what features that experience requires in order to take place. I think probably most people will have heard of the Flow Project and Csikszentmihalyi and his work. But one thing that he identifies is that it requires immediate feedback. It requires that you actually enter into direct interaction where you act and then you immediately get a response back whether what you did was helpful or good or bad or sort of helped you or didn't. And so if you have this tight coupling and you continue to move beyond your current zone of comfort or skill, so we're right at the edge, that's where experience flow, because you can't entirely predict what will happen, but you can make meaningful, you can take meaningful actions. And so it's sort of this, again, this balancing between knowing what the environment is like, but not completely, to being able to do something that makes sense, but you don't know whether it will exactly have the effect that you intended. And so you're still figuring out what is the exact environment like and what are actually my skills able to achieve in that environment.
It's like living without knowing the ending to the story, right? It's like you don't know where it's going to go.
Right, but you definitely still have the feeling of agency, as Ollie was pointing towards. Like you have the sense that you can take meaningful action. I think one of the things that really strikes people down or that people struggle with is sort of this procrastination phenomenon. And people have a hard time understanding, why am I procrastinating? Why am I not doing the things I clearly know I need to be doing? And it is because, or one of the ideas is that their environment, especially in school and probably also from their parents, didn't reward meaningful action. Like it was sort of randomized. So if the environment gives you random reward and punishment for whatever actions you take, you will never want to actually take an action because you don't know what will come from it. So there's no coupling between taking an action, having a reward for it, or taking a bad action, having a punishment for it. And so people don't develop this feeling of, oh, if I do something, something will happen, and I will be able to actually learn from it and then feed it back again into my next action.
Do you think the effect of that today is that people don't take action because they're not sure what's going to happen, or they take too much action because they're not getting feedback, or they're just like doing the wrong things because they're not getting feedback immediately in that sense?
I think they don't take, well, at least that's the experience that I relate to most. I definitely remember long stretches of time in my early adult life where I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do, what was a good use of my time, and also doing the things I needed to do in order to succeed in the structures that I was enveloped in, like college or school. I mean, I was a good student and I actually really enjoyed school, was good at it. But then after that, when sort of all the scaffolding of structure was stripped away, nobody was anymore telling me when I had to study what was a meaningful action, like learning. Nobody was giving me grades that told me whether I had done a good job of this. I had to start sort of taking all that structure that was out in the world, embodied in the teachers and the institution of the school and all that stuff, and pull it in. I think that's a lot of young people have a really hard time taking the structures that are out there in the world, pulling them in, and then actually gaining the sense that they can structure themselves and their environment in a way that helps them move forward in the world and experience that meaning.
Yeah, I think self-directed learning is something people really struggle with because we're so entrained through education. It's just done this way, and then when that's taken away or that finishes, then you think, oh, my education's finished. Now I get a job, and now I take instructions from someone else, and that's this idea of self-directed learning. And I think sovereignty is going to be a huge topic for us. It's going to come up a lot. But yeah, it's been my experience for sure. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what Maurice is saying. Everyone's saying anyway, marrying up with what Ollie is saying about learn the martial arts. I have that background as well. Yes, you learn that there are, that you only get, depending on what style you do, You learn there's only be certain things coming at you, whether it be a fist, an elbow, a knee, a foot, someone's going to try and grab you and try and throw you. So you understand there are certain limits, but the way in which those things come at you is almost an infinite way, a number of times, or ways and methods those things can come at you. So it kind of teaches you to become used to the chaos, like I guess Morris was saying with when people take psychedelics, you know, or physiology. And I think that's, again, a beautiful way of maybe trying to, from young, I guess, to instill it in people to get used to the chaos. Because when you do think about real life, being out in the big wide world, you know, from age 18, you're technically an adult in some countries, you know, if you know, really boil it down, there's only a limited number of things that can happen to you via another human being or via an environmental factor. It's more or less finite. It'd be a long list, but it's finite. So once you've got that, I think once you've got that kind of understanding, and then you kind of break it down into, all right, what do I actually have control over, or how can I make myself ready to take these things? You know, you're not having these straightforward conversations with yourself, but they're still happening in the subconscious. It will make you far more resilient, and I think probably a lot less likely to, well, again, I'm not a psychologist, but to suffer from some of the anxieties that people are feeling, you know, you know, by having on such exposure to social media and so on. Because, you know, that's, you know, everyone's going to be swept up into it, whether you want to or not. Even if you don't have social media presence, you're going to be hearing about people's social media presences via conversation with, you know, the masses. So I think that it's a really great way, and I think great benefit of, you know, I'm not getting an affiliate fee for spouting about martial arts, but it's something that definitely comes from, you know, something so primal. You know, your reptilian brains have to deal with someone trying to hurt you, and then, you know, when you think that, well, I can survive it, I can deal with it, I've got half an idea what's going to come at me, or at least know how to keep myself, you know, conscious, it can make things a lot easier. Just wanted to throw it out there.
Cool, thanks.
I could definitely
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I can definitely relate to that, because as Moritz just wrote, there's no symbolic interpretation to getting punched in the face. So there's no space to kind of put your own sort of mental constructs onto something. You know, it kind of puts you a little bit closer in touch with reality. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Len, he was saying there's only a certain amount of things that can happen to you or interactions. Do you mean like in a sense of like danger or threats, and when you're trying to control things in your environment, how would you kind of cover that? Is that what you meant in terms of like a danger or things you try and control that are out of your control?
Yeah, so things that spark an emotional response with humans tend to be the strongest drivers to do things. Well, that's the assumption anyway. I don't know the mind of everyone. So, for example, talking, so I like to say danger. If you're somewhere, someone starts shouting at you, for whatever reason, there's an altercation, it's going to be one of two ways probably. Nothing's going to happen or something's going to happen. You know, and that it kind of makes, though life isn't binary, I've found that from such a young age, I was in martial arts from about age 2 onwards, being in an environment, I guess, that has constantly affecting my primal brain has made me able to see it's, though I'm 100% aware that it makes me seem, well, my other half says there's something wrong with me, because I would say it's this or that, or it's that. I understand there are grey areas, but for the immediate things, keep me calm and present in the moment to hopefully analyse as logically as possible what's going on. Knowing the case, okay, what can happen, you know, you're just kind of, you're mentally ready for it. It's not a complete shock to the system that wipes you out. So I think, so from the danger side of things, that's the benefits of being exposed to chaos a lot. If you want to call it chaos, don't say it's always a bad thing. And then on the other side of things, he's talking about human interaction. You meet someone, you know, he's having a conversation with a brand new person you've never met before. The amount of things that's going to happen is very, very limited. I mean, obviously it depends socially, like where you are. If you're in England, first topic of conversation will be about weather's not bad today, is it? You know, stuff like that, the weather. Or you're going to be talking about football teams, or, you know, and it's these things, you know, it's, I think it's kind of probably how society has been able to flourish, because especially before we became far more distracted, we're able to, on a subconscious level, completely understand that it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. You know, it's, I know what we think of as fine is that, you know, we can keep breathing, keep living, do the things you want to do. You know, we're very aware on a level that everything's going to be fine. You know, you understand the outcome's going to happen, and it's because, I guess, the the level of reaction and where you needed to get your feedback from, like Ali was saying, was a lot smaller. You know, if me and that person, or me and a couple of people, and now with the ability to communicate far further and wider, I think we're still trained in primal way to expect immediate feedback, and when it doesn't come, that's when the problems start. And it's, you kind of make yourself, what's it, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expects to get a different response every time. And I think that trying to apply that to social, our reptilian brain hasn't caught up yet to that, being able to handle it. So we're going to have, and that's why I think you've seen such a spike in, say, mindfulness or say mindfulness courses or online ebooks and guides, which I don't think is a bad thing. Whether or not they actually bring about desired effect, I do not know. I've not tried them. I don't think I need them, but I think that's why we're going to see a spike. And it's like with everything, it's like with free markets, there's going to be a peak and a trough, and as long as it's allowed, people's trying to think of remedies and do things such as what people in this group are doing by being more mindful of the way in which they live their lives. As a species, we tend to do what the monkey does, not what they say, So once we see it working, it's going to take time. It's going to take time, probably a couple of generations, for it to probably fix itself. Everything should be okay. I'm very optimistic about it,
Yeah, go ahead, Moritz.
I was just going to add a little bit of nuance to what he was saying about when we don't have that immediate feedback, our brain sort of goes into this feedback cycle on itself, sort of starts to feed on itself. And that's actually what anxiety and neurosis is like, where you start to pay more attention to your perception of danger in the environment.
Trying to predict feedback or predict danger.
Exactly, predict danger, predict feedback, and then any kind of stimulus that gives you that justification sends you into this loop, that sort of infinite loop. And if you know anything about programming, infinite loops are what you want to avoid. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that anxiety is a huge part of it because you don't have the feedback, and so you're kind of like waiting for it, and you can just drive yourself crazy in that sense if you perceive something that's not actually there.
Which is why you need to find a way to to structure your own environment in such a way that what you're doing is meaningful in that structure, not necessarily in the particular activity itself that you're doing. Like for me, as you said, you have the morning ritual that sets you up perfectly, sort of also in a more embodied sense actually, than just sort of giving it meaning, but also knowing, okay, how does this activity fit into my life? How is it furthering my movement, my progress towards something that I care about, that I actually want to get towards? And so if you have that clear, then you will feel enough meaningfulness in the activity that you will actually want to do it, and it will be relatively effortless to do it, even though the activity itself is not very enjoyable. But if you don't know how what you're doing connects to sort of overarching ultimate concerns that you have, then you will have a very hard time motivating yourself. And actually, a lot of the sort of productivity gurus and ideas and systems have gone through a sort of progression of different types. Like we started off with values of, okay, you just need to value the right things. That was like for a decade or something. Then we had motivational things, like how do you get yourself pumped up, motivated? How do you get yourself to sort of the state where, oh, rah, rah, I'm gonna do it. That's sort of the Tony Robbins type stuff. And today we're entering or are sort of in the middle of process first productivity sort of systems, where you actually structure the process of how you engage with everything in your day in a way that you, like it starts to make systemic progress towards what you want to achieve, where you don't have to think at every single point, oh, do I want to do this or whatever. And it's not really about motivation either, but it isn't about knowing what to do in what circumstance and how these things connect to each other. And GTD, Getting Things Done, for example, is the first that really kicked this off. And another guy that I'm following, Tiago Forte, has sort of taken this into the digital arena and has sort of made digital first all kinds of processes, not only for actually managing your tasks, but also for dealing with all the information that's coming at you and managing this personal knowledge, which I think is something that very few people really think about, and that confounds them. Like they get lost in, oh, I found this cool article, let me read it immediately, right now, when I encounter it. And then suddenly their day is gone and they've done nothing other than follow these different rabbit holes and haven't done anything. So if you don't have
Emil laughing because he follows a lot of rabbit holes.
Oh, I do too, man, and I love them, especially if you don't have anything else to do. But like, if you don't have a different place to put something, and you have this fear of losing something that's interesting, then you will engage with it. So the challenge is more to, where can I forward this really interesting thing that I want to get to, that I will definitely return to at a point soon enough in time. But I see Emil has raised his hand, so I want to let him speak.
Yeah, I just want to try to add a different perspective to what you have been saying, and what most people have been saying is there's a lot of talk about productivity and doing a lot, achieving a lot. And I've found a really beautiful Zen proverb that says, chop wood, carry water. And it has a lot of meaning to me, because if you can find joy in the simple things, you don't actually have the craving for achieving much more than that. And I've found different states, especially after long Vipassana retreats, where I come out and I just feel like I don't need anything. I don't need everything I was dreaming about. It's pointless, because I have everything right here with probably what is the direct feedback loop of the senses, because I just sense everything. I sense the beauty in the world just by experiencing it full on with all of my senses completely. But what I'm trying to do is try to integrate that into a normal life where you can still earn money, you can still have meaning in your life. But it's been super, super hard to join those two worlds of full on focus and inwards attention, and being in the world of information, the information age, where everything is available at your fingertips at any moment, and you can learn anything about everything. So it's been really tough, but I found definitely that we don't actually need as much as we think. The mind is playing a lot of tricks on us, and we have these basic needs. When they're all taken care of, if we somehow can create a business model around ourselves and create all the needs when all our needs are met, then try to focus inwards and to just be with what is, then it's really beautiful what can be from just that. Just being, especially being in nature brings you into that, or being in the ice definitely is a good tool for that. And just being very, very focused. Actually, whatever you do, you can bring it into your full attention and it can feel amazing, even if it's taking out the trash. I had this, maybe a bad analogy about it, but after I came out of Vipassana, I was feeling so deeply that even though I had to wash toilets for the rest of my life, I could find joy in that. So it kind of explains a little bit how I felt. And it's not like that anymore, but it's definitely possible to get to those states. And I think that's what some of the people who actually have these jobs, which we other people find disgusting or boring, they have a way to tap into a flow and enjoying doing what they do, even no matter what it is. And it's really interesting, actually. Yeah.
I think is a great point. I think what we were talking about a minute ago is all about the anxiety. When you're trying to predict the outcome or predict the danger or feedback, that's where anxiety kind of takes you out of being present. And I think that if you perceive, because we're perceiving that we might lose something, right? If we're not aware of a danger, then we might lose something, like we might lose, I don't know, some kind of status, or in a context of a conversation where someone says something bad about you, and our whole needing to belong in a tribe, links back to that historically. But I think if you feel really empowered and good and confident in yourself, or you're not even threatened by any danger, because whatever comes, you're going to be able to handle it, and that's just such a strong core part of your being, then you will never get anxious, because you don't care. Like, you just don't care. It's not going to be a threat to you. And so I think that for me has been huge for me, going from maybe caring much less about what everyone else thinks, because it's just not important to me. And I know what makes me feel good. And I know that as long as I do those things, I'm going to keep feeling good. And that's the most immediate feedback I need. And so I found, like, that morning ritual, and I do even more now, hours a day just spending outside in nature and in the sun. It just builds up my strength to such a level where I can just share without reservation whatever's on my mind, even some of it might be whatever controversial, or people might judge me, or people might say things. I honestly couldn't care, because I know the message is going to get out there to the people that can read it and appreciate it. But I no longer try and predict or get too drawn into a discussion, like if someone's trying to trigger me or someone say something, like happens a lot now because I'm sharing all the time, but I no longer care. Like I need to pay attention to what everyone else is doing or predict what their response is going to be, to kind of justify what I'm saying or what's important. So I think these dangers are real or imagined, or much more imagined now, because the brain is constantly trying to protect us, right? And so like that's another common sort of side effect of the news or like danger is like we over exaggerate every little danger because that's just something we're wired to do to survive. And I think that if you feel really strong, and let's say you've killed 100 tigers or lions in your life, and another tiger or lion comes up to you, you can be able to handle it, right? And it's just another tiger or a lion. But if it's your first lion or tiger and you've seen all your fans and friends get mauled and killed by tigers, you're gonna freak the fuck out. So I think that it's very much applying that to the online world or to whatever modern context. If you feel really strong and confident, nothing's really gonna faze you as much.
Yeah, I'm really interested in knowing what you've done to come to that state, because I know for my own personal experience, I've probably been living most of my life like most people do. Like we get a sense of something that doesn't feel good and react to that. So being on stage, having a talk in front of a lot of people brings this anxiety into almost everyone in the world. And most people, they tend to avoid that because it doesn't feel good. And then there's another thing that makes you feel really good and you want more of that. So you keep craving for those experiences and I tend to avoid those things that doesn't feel good and go more towards the things that feel good. So how to practically be able to kind of not numb the senses, but kind of integrate them without reacting unconsciously. I'm really interested in knowing what you've done to be able to strengthen that connection without reacting, just because I know that's how it works with Facebook as well. You write something and unconsciously you're waiting for what are people's reaction, how will they feel about it, because if they start attacking me, I have the sensation coming up and I'll try to avoid that, or I have to defend myself. So I know that's how most people work. So if you have a workaround around that, please share.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some good techniques. I think sun gazing for me has been really powerful, and we can definitely talk about that. I'm going to do another show on that for sure. But anything that builds your energy up and makes you feel good, and I think some things just there's a physiology to it in terms of like if you understand your autonomic nervous system, like your voluntary and involuntary systems, and how stress works in the body. If you perceive you're under stress all the time, you're just not going to have the resilience to handle more danger. So it's like if you feel really resilient, you can handle more stress, and that can be in any form of actual danger or online danger to your identity or whatever it is you think is under attack. But yeah, I think there's some really good exercises that let you turn off your stress physiology. So it's like an on or off fight or flight thing, right? And if you're constantly being triggered, this fight or flight thing is constantly on. You're just basically going to burn through your cortisol, and you're going to have zero buffer and resilience. And so like there's certain hormones and biomarkers that I've tested, and I can actually see my body how it's handling stress over time. But if you have an awareness of these things, it's just exercise that can switch those things on and off. And I think the way you prime yourself in the morning is such a powerful part of how your day is going to play out, because you're just setting a sort of baseline for how things should be. And if you're constantly getting pulled around from the minute you wake up by different things in your environment and reacting all the time, I mean, that's just your world. You're just not in control at all. You don't feel any agency. You're just constantly going to get triggered or anxious or whatever it is. So having a place where you have that built into your day, if you have enough sovereignty in your life, you can build that into the first part of your day. That morning ritual that primes you, it's super powerful. It carries over to the rest of your day for sure. I saw Nick wanted to say something, so go ahead, Nick.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about intention and knowing yourself, which I feel like is a little bit of a thread that all of you guys have been talking about on this call. So talking about like reacting to our environment and reacting to the social media world, and being in the present moment, setting the intentions for those interactions, setting those intentions for the practice that you have, setting the intention for the way in which you develop your relationships, allows you to deepen that relationship to yourself, for me, there's like thought patterns and thought loops and layers to getting to know myself that are kind of underlying reasons why, like, what is the reason why I'm not waking up and doing that morning routine, even if I know it's good for me? What is the reason why I'm clicking on those links if I know that if I'm reacting in a certain way? Like, what if I think that things aren't affecting me in a certain way, but they actually are on a bodily level? And so bringing that intention into deepening those relationships, whether it be like with technology, whether it be with our practice, whether it be with ourselves, and then sort of bringing that into knowing yourself. So like, for example, like becoming grounded, there's been like many different iterations of my life where I thought that I'm super grounded and like, look at me, I'm so spiritual. And then the next layer comes off and then I realize just how ungrounded I was. And so like, you know, like maybe I'm doing a grounding practice, I'm doing a practice to become more grounded. And the whole time I'm thinking about becoming grounded, or I'm thinking about why I'm doing this practice versus just doing the practice. And so as we deepen these relationships with ourselves through our intention and deepening those relationships, whether it be, you know, through just everyday practices like sun gazing or breath work or shamanism or vision quests or Vipassana breath work or Wim Hof or whatever it is, they can all, like the energy there is neutral, and it can be positive or negative or neither. That's a paradox of it. So for example, we can be doing Wim Hof and we can be immersing ourselves in nature to become more grounded and to deepen our relationship with nature. But at the same time, if our intention is being provoked by thought patterns, whether they be ourselves or injected thought loops or multi-generational or belief systems we're inherited from others or from culture, we could actually be beating ourselves up by, you know, forcing the envelope and I'm going to do get into the cold water and all of this kind of thing. And the same can be said for vision quests. I've gone and done vision quests. And what is the intention behind doing the vision quest? Is it to become more spiritual? Is it to become more grounded into nature? Is it to prove to yourself that you're a warrior? Is it to say that you've done a vision quest? Or is it to develop your relationship with the family and the elements and that kind of thing? And you know, there's, you know, especially in the psychedelic world, you guys are talking about like the chaos of the medicine and getting to that edge. It's really showing you like front and center who you are. And at the same time, the paradox of it is that there's also escapism. You know, there's the level of people that keep going back to the ayahuasca ceremonies, that keep going to those retreats, or they find a small sense of who they are, and then they feel the need to express that, and then they go back to their home country, and then they set up an ayahuasca center, and then they become the guru, and then they become the one that's teaching everyone the same things that they're fighting against in the culture that they've come from, that they're fighting against, or they might deepen their relationship to a point where they actually find that they haven't been sovereign the whole time. So they might be fighting for sovereignty. They might be, you know, part of a movement, or they might be protesting, and they might be fighting against the man. And then they might realize that their thoughts are controlling them, or that they've become really dogmatic in their practice, or that they are, you know, not as sovereign as what they first thought. And so how do we deepen our relationship with ourselves through intention and bring in awareness to all those different layers of it, and be happy with the paradox that, you know, our attention might be something that or our productivity or the practices that we do might be a reflection of what's going on internally. And how do we be kind to ourselves and love ourselves and still act in our highest alignment if we aren't doing those practices, if we're procrastinating, or we're not doing our morning routine and we know that it's in our highest good, but we're still not doing it. How do we be with that feeling, and how do we process what's coming up while not making ourselves bad or wrong, and deepening that relationship with ourselves and accepting all of the parts of ourselves at the same time.
Yeah, that's huge. I think like accepting where you are on your journey, and obviously we have this ideal of perfection of maybe stories we hear about other people are doing this and I'm not able to do it, or what we're living up to. There's a lot of it comes to comparing yourself to something else, right? Other than where you are on your journey. So I think that you will get feedback all the time, every day. Like, do I feel good? Yes, no. If not, sit with it and find out what it is, right? Just let it come up. But you're not always going to be able to be perfect version of yourself every day. And I think that no one can. And a lot depends on where you are on your journey and the stress you have in your life. And like you said, even like multi-generational trauma or God knows where it comes from, these belief systems, this conditioning that's just playing out. And you just have to let it come up and get on your journey, right? You're not going to be able to get to the end of the story. You have to go through the story. So I think that a lot of people maybe have too many illusions about where they should be on their journey, and maybe other people that are doing better, and a lot of this comparison comes into it. When your intention can come from trying to be as good as everyone else or be better than who you are, and not really accepting where you are right now. So that's definitely a part of it for sure. Go on, Lynn.
There we go. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's talking about comparisons. Do you think that's an instinctual thing that's come, where our ancestors who, would see what the competition were up to? Okay, I need to do better than them to be able to get my mate of choice. Do you think that's something that's going to be ever possible to escape? I mean, I'm sure some people have experienced it, which would be awesome if that's the case. But do you think it's really a benefit because it's kind of what helps get humanity, depending on what you believe happened, to this point? So just put a question out there for everyone. See what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I think that competition or comparison is a natural sort of progression of evolution. If you look at primates and how you have alpha males that dominate, and obviously everyone wants to be the alpha male, right? So that's a part of our wiring and our conditioning, is that in nature, evolution's pretty, aggressive in that sense of like only the strongest survive, and you take that where it's plugged into our genes in a way. But I think that those same dangers aren't around anymore. So in terms of what you need to be happy or successful or thrive, it's not the same domination as it used to be, because there's an abundance of everything now. It doesn't take that much. You just need education and a bit of imagination. You can have a very good life for yourself. You don't need to be the alpha male above all the other men and, dominate people around you. But I think that that's still a very maybe primitive part of our conditioning that, you see it play out all the time around you. So it's something that I think we haven't evolved past. It's not to say it's a bad thing, because you can take it as inspiration, but if you beat yourself up because you're not there or something, that's when it becomes like a negative loop. Maybe. I don't know what everyone else thinks.
Yeah, I think one of the points that Jordan Peterson makes about feeling good where you are in life and sort of where you can gain positive emotions from is sort of this climbing of the status hierarchy, which we sort of know that actually lobsters themselves, as he says, also have the same circuitry with serotonin that we do, in the sense that when they win a fight, they sort of buff up more, they gain the sort of hit of dopamine, and they feel better, and they actually are more healthy in a sense if they do that. So there's, in a very real sense, knowing, and we all do this subconsciously, if we don't want it or not, we compare ourselves. There's really very little we can do to shut that off, although you can do some things to sort of lower how you pay attention to it or how much you find it meaningful. But there's always comparison going on in the subconscious systems, like status comparison. And so there is, in a very real sense, so this dark side also to at least accepting that is real and not saying it's not real, and trying to move forward. And I think that's not necessarily a completely bleak view of humanity, as in the people who don't manage to do that are just fucked, but just that there are many, many, many hierarchies in a sense. And so one way that you can have like everybody be sort of at the top of one hierarchy is if you have something that makes you unique, or something that allows you to fit the best into one particular niche in the environment, if you will. And so you will be feeling positive emotions in that environment, because other people who come in that environment and are not as good as you, you will be sort of above them in some sense. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be absolutely on top of all of society, but that you have to feel like you are good enough at something that you can beat other people at that. And it doesn't have to be a sort of competitive, you're a bad person for not being good at this thing.
Yes, have some mastery of some domain that you can
Exactly.
add value back to the world and feel, you find meaning there. Yeah, that's huge. I think Peter wanted to say something, but go ahead, Peter. Peter, can you hear me? You're still muted, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to like the still.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to go back to the feedback loops. I think it's a big problem with the instant gratification, where apps that are designed to like the easy access of sugar and alcohol and drugs. So people expect to get instant dopamine kicks out of everything they do. And like, even if you know what you're supposed to be doing, it's easy to lose motivation, like in day-to-day grind. So one easy way to hack this for me, I found, was using an app called Habitbull. So I put down a checklist of 7 habits I want to be doing every day, and just putting a check mark on there like gives me the little dopamine kick that I need to stay motivated. Like, yeah.
It's like ticking things off that you've achieved. Is that it?
Yeah, just ping, 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 like every day. 7 habits. Like in the morning, taking a course for like an hour or 2, then reading and meditation, working out, writing, research, and leaving up some time for bonus task. And like that helped me a lot. And yeah, another thing that helped me was like simply when I start doing one of these tasks, I just take my phone, throw it back there, so I don't grab it at any time. I, for example, installed an add-on called Newsfeed Eradicator, so I can never lose myself into scrolling the Facebook feed. Like just these small things you can do to keep yourself in check. And like I also have 200 tabs on my browser open at all times, so I just categorize them, and when I'm doing one type of thing, I keep myself in just this one category. And like it's not that I never fuck up and just go to the other category, but yeah, it's really helpful. Like for most time it works.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the instant gratification, I think, is just it's wired into us, and again, it's kind of hijacked by technology. So like all the algorithms and just the multitude of things out there. So there's definitely like some good hacks, like with apps and things, to block you from doing that. I feel like you can't escape technology. You probably can harness it better, so it's more empowering and it doesn't kind of control you. But also, like for me, I get so much dopamine hit from the sun, and sun gazing is so powerful that it's almost like an addiction as well. But it's a natural thing our physiology is wired to, and so nothing really can top that. And I think that it also, like what Moritz was saying about, kind of normalizing how much impact those other things can have. If you have something that's more powerful, it just kind of makes all those things less meaningful or less, of a distraction. So because I don't
Resetting
know about sun gazing.
significance.
Yeah, because sun gazing is just so much stronger than anything else. Everything else loses that ability to distract you or to disturb you. It's huge for me.
Yeah, I think it's very important to like get the habit first. Like for me, it was sort of like fake it till you make it. Like before I started enjoying doing these things, I needed to make them a habit and like do them for at least half an hour a day and something like that. So once I started actually doing them, then I actually started enjoying them. Doing the meditation and working out, like it helped me. I disconnect and it helps me stay grounded, and then I write, so it keeps me motivated and makes my head clear, and I know what I have to do next.
Yeah, it can definitely give you that maybe grounding in that sense of how you organize yourself, so you don't just get pulled around or reacting to things, but you feel more agency because you're directing it a bit more, like what order things happen in. And I don't have a structure to work life or even a day anymore in terms of like I said, I get up first thing, I normally go outside for a couple hours, and then I come back in, I get on the computer and I just work as much as I want to or not. But what I've found now is I'm actually getting drawn to spending more time outside, and I don't want to be on the computer as much. And I take the computer outside sometimes, and I can't even see on the screen because the sun's so bright. On the laptops technology doesn't work very well. Devices outside, and so I'm outside squinting at my laptop, and like this just feels stupid. What am I like? What am I trying to achieve here? So I'm still trying to find that balance of like, yeah, how much time do I want to spend actually on the computer? I do have some business-related things I do online, but I have a lot more autonomy now that I don't need to be on the screen very much at all if I don't want to. So I tend to be outside more during the day, and then when the sun goes down, I do a bit more work in the evening now. That kind of balance works for me. But I think you got to find some way of getting a handle on that if it's just overriding you. I'm at the point now where I spend so much time outside that the computer is kind of losing meaning for me a little bit, and I've been getting drawn into psychedelics and other things as well. So there's definitely some of the topics we can go to on another show. But yeah, Moritz, kind of good point. We're already an hour and a half in, so I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add, or any other questions or suggestions for follow up. If not, then that's all good. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, chaps. I'll get it up and see what everyone else thinks. We'll get some immediate feedback and see if it's useful for other people. But yeah, next one's going to be Thursday. Some Moritz will suggest a topic, and we'll be here again. Yeah, Thursday same time. So great to chat, and we'll see you all soon.
See you soon, guys.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.